Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be tackling something today that I'm sure is a big pinpoint for a lot of businesses out there, especially in B2B payments, and that is high churn rates after onboarding.
Yes.
You spend all this time and energy, getting these new users to your platform,
Right.
and then they just disappear.
Yeah, they're gone.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right.
you set up this incredible buffet,
Yeah.
and everyone walks out before they can even get to dessert.
It's like, why did I even bother? You know?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher for a lot of companies. And that's actually why we're diving deep today into an article from wdeer.agency called 5 Whys to Combat High Churn in B2B Payment Platforms. And it was just published this week.
Oh, perfect.
And we're going to kind of think of this deep dive as a detective investigation.
I like that.
We're going to use the 5 Whys framework to figure out what is at the bottom of this churn mystery.
Okay. So first things first, what exactly is the 5 Whys framework?
So it's this problem-solving technique that was made famous by Toyota. And it basically involves just asking why over and over again.
Okay.
So you ask why. And whatever the answer is to that why, you ask why again.
Okay.
So you just keep peeling back the layers of the problem
I see.
to try to get to that root cause.
Like an onion.
Yeah, exactly like an onion, hopefully with fewer tears.
Hopefully fewer tears.
Yeah, exactly.
So applying that to the problem we're looking at today, we're essentially asking, why are users churning after onboarding 5 times in a row?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article kind of suggests that the answer might not be as obvious as you think.
Okay. Interesting.
So let's start with that first why. Why are users abandoning these B2B payment platforms right after they sign up?
So my initial thought would be that, maybe the platform's just not meeting their needs or expectations, or maybe they're finding a competitor that is better, or, something like that.
Yeah, that's a really common assumption that we see, but the article actually points to something different. It points to user frustration with the onboarding process itself.
Really?
Yeah. So it's like, if you think about going to a concert.
Okay.
And you're so excited to see the show, but then you get stuck in this never-ending line just to get through security.
Yeah, I hate that.
Right. It can really sour your mood, even though you were so excited.
Totally.
Yeah. So instead of blaming the platform itself, we're kind of focusing on the first impression.
Gotcha. So it's more about the first impression rather than the actual platform.
Exactly. It's like the welcome mat. How welcoming is it?
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah. And actually, there is some data to back this up.
Okay.
A study by Visa found that something like 70% of users will probably abandon the onboarding process if they hit any kind of friction in the first 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, yeah. That's barely enough time to make a cup of coffee.
Wow, that's crazy. I guess it makes sense. In the digital age, we all have such short attention spans.
Right, we want everything right now.
I know, I've definitely been guilty of abandoning online forms if they're too long or complicated.
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's keep digging a little deeper.
Okay.
Let's ask why.
Number 2.
All right, shoot. Why is this onboarding flow so complex in the first place?
No, especially for these B2B payment platforms. I have to imagine that security must be a huge factor.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Security is super important.
Yeah, you're dealing with sensitive financial information. So.
Yeah, exactly. And, this is where things like know your business or KYB regulations come into play.
KYB.
Yeah, so just like you have to verify your identity when you open a personal bank account,
Right.
Companies also have to verify the identity of their business clients.
Okay.
That makes sense. Yeah, so it's not just about being nosy or anything like that.
Right, it's about making sure everything is above board.
Exactly. It's about preventing fraud and money laundering and, those kinds of things.
So it's not just like an extra step for no reason.
No, it's very important.
So how does KYB translate to a complex onboarding experience?
So to comply with KYB, these platforms have to collect a ton of information about the businesses that are signing up.
I see.
Things like their ownership structure, their financial history, what kind of business activities they're involved in, all that stuff.
Right.
So that usually means a lot of forms, a lot of verification steps, a lot of requests for documentation.
I see. So it's like this classic kind of tug of war between security and user experience. Because you need the security, but it makes it so much harder for users to actually get on board.
Exactly. And that brings us to our third why.
Okay, what's number 3?
Why are there so many forms and so many steps involved in gathering all this information?
That's a good question.
Yeah, couldn't it be streamlined a little bit?
I guess my thought would be that's just how the systems were probably originally designed. They probably prioritize collecting all the information up front. to make sure they were compliant without really thinking too much about the impact on user experience.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The article basically argues that a lot of platforms are built with this compliance-first mentality.
Okay.
Which leaves very little room to be user-friendly, you know?
Yeah, like they built a high-speed train but forgot to put in any comfortable seats.
Exactly.
You're going to get there fast. But
you're not going to enjoy the ride.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we've got a complex onboarding flow because of all these compliance requirements.
Right.
It results in a ton of forms for users to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes me wonder why gather all of that information at once.
Yeah.
Why not break it down into smaller, more manageable steps?
Right. Like, why do we need all this information on day one? That's why. Number 4.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where we start to see this like key design flaw. A lot of these platforms aren't set up to do phased or conditional onboarding.
What does that mean?
So it means that the system isn't designed to collect the information gradually, in a way that's more user-friendly.
Gotcha. So it's not the information itself that's the problem, it's the way that it's presented.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So imagine if instead of requiring all those forms up front, we just ask for the bare minimum just to get people started.
Okay.
And then once they've had a chance to poke around and see what the platform's all about, then we can start to gather, the other details.
I see.
So this is basically the essence of phased onboarding.
Okay, so give them a little sample platter before hitting them with the full buffet.
Exactly.
Let them try a few things, see what they like,
Right.
and then they're more likely to stick around for the main course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to our final why for today.
Okay, hit me with it.
So if this phased approach is so much better, why haven't most platforms adopted it yet?
But that's a great question.
I think it really highlights something important about how we design and build things in the digital world. But we'll dive more into that in part 2.
All right. Sounds good. Looking forward to it. So before the break, we were, really getting deep into these 5 whys, trying to figure out why these B2B payment platforms have such high churn rates.
Yeah.
And we landed on this really interesting question.
Yeah.
If this phased onboarding approach is so much better,
Right.
why haven't more platforms adopted it?
It's a really good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like there's this disconnect between what users actually want and what businesses are focused on. And the article kind of hints at the fact that, a lot of these payment platforms, especially in the B2B space,
right,
are so focused on compliance and security that they sometimes forget about the humans that are actually using their platforms.
Yeah, it's like they built this super secure vault to protect their data,
Right.
but they forgot to put a welcome mat outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, we checked all the compliance boxes, but did we stop to think if this is actually, a good experience for the people using our platform?
Exactly. And I think that's why this 5th why is so important.
Okay.
Why hasn't this phased onboarding been adopted? It's like this blind spot, in the whole design process. Like we didn't really think about the user's journey from the beginning.
Yeah, it reminds me of those websites where you get bombarded with all those cookie consent pop-ups.
Oh my gosh.
Before you've even read a single sentence.
The worst.
And you're just like, wait, hold on.
Right.
Do I even want to be here?
It's like you're already on the defensive.
Totally. And it just creates this friction, between you and the platform.
Yeah, a barrier almost.
And in a competitive landscape like B2B payments, that can really be a deal breaker.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's shift our thinking a little bit here.
Okay.
If we're prioritizing the user's experience alongside compliance, right.
What would that actually look like? How would this phased onboarding work?
So the article kind of breaks it down into these 3 main stages.
Okay.
The first one is essential setup first.
Okay.
So this is all about just getting the user up and running as quickly as possible with the bare minimum information.
Okay.
So instead of hitting them with this wall of forms, you just collect the absolute essentials to create their account. Give them a little taste of what the platform can do.
I like that, like a sample platter.
Exactly.
Before they commit to the whole buffet.
Right. You let them, sample a few things, see what they like. And then they're more likely to stick around for the whole meal.
Exactly.
And then once they're kind of engaged and they see the value, you can move on to stage 2, which is deferred compliance steps.
Okay.
So this is where you gather all that more detailed information that you need for, KYB and all the other regulations.
Right. But you do it in a way that feels less intrusive.
So you're not ignoring compliance or anything.
No, not at all.
You're just being strategic about when you ask for certain things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about timing.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah. And then the last stage is in-product nudges.
What are those?
So basically, it's about integrating the remaining information requests into the user's normal workflow.
So, for example, if someone's about to make a payment, that might be a good time to be like, oh, hey, just a reminder.
Right.
Exactly. You need to upload this document.
Yep. Just a little nudge, nothing too aggressive. Yeah. Just kind of reminding them, hey, we still need this from you.
Like a friendly reminder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not a demand.
Right. And by kind of embedding these nudges into how the platform actually works, it makes the whole compliance process feel like less of a chore.
Okay.
And more like just, a normal part of using the platform.
I see. So it's all about making it as seamless as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so implementing this phased approach sounds great in theory, but how do we know if it's actually working?
Right. How do we measure success?
Well, I mean, obviously we would want to see a decrease in that churn rate, right?
Definitely.
Like if fewer people are leaving after they sign up.
That's a really good sign.
That's a good sign.
Yeah. But there are other things we can look at too.
Okay.
Like how long it takes people to complete the forms.
Okay.
And how many errors they're making.
Right. So if it's taking less time and there are fewer errors, then we know we've made it less frustrating.
Exactly. It's like streamlining a factory production line.
Okay.
Fewer bottlenecks. Smoother process.
I like that analogy.
And then ultimately, what we really want to see is, are people actually using the platform?
Right. Are they actually engaging with the features?
Exactly.
Because it doesn't matter how great the onboarding is if no one's using the platform.
Exactly.
You want them to stick around and actually become active users.
Right.
So by using this phased approach and tracking all these different metrics, we can hopefully start to turn that tide of churn and create a much more, welcoming and engaging experience for everybody.
So it's a win-win.
Yeah.
We meet our compliance requirements and the user has a better experience.
Exactly.
Everyone's happy.
Everybody wins.
But are there any real-world examples of companies that are actually doing this well?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like who's doing phased onboarding, right?
So think about online banking platforms.
Okay.
A lot of banks now let you open a very basic account with just a little bit of information up front. You can start, making transactions, playing around with the features.
Yeah.
And then as you start using more advanced features, or if you hit certain limits, they'll be like, hey, we need a little bit more information from you now.
So it's like you get a taste of what the platform can do.
Yeah.
Without being bombarded with paperwork.
And it also kind of subtly builds trust too, right? Because they're not asking for everything right away.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, hey, we trust you.
Exactly.
To use our platform.
They're not suspicious of you.
Right, exactly. And then we'll ask for more information later.
Exactly.
That's a really good example.
Yeah. And it kind of brings it back to, this idea of transparency and trust rather than suspicion.
Right.
So we've talked about the problem.
Yes.
We've talked about a potential solution. We've seen some examples.
Yeah.
But I'm sure our listeners are wondering, okay, what does this all mean for me?
Right. What are the takeaways?
Yeah. So what are the key takeaways for, B2B payment leaders out there?
That's a great question.
I think the first one, and probably the most important one, is the power of this 5 whys framework.
Yeah. It's so simple, but it's so effective.
Yeah. It really helps you uncover those hidden problems.
Exactly. It encourages you to keep asking why until you really figure out the underlying reason.
It's like being a detective.
Yes, exactly.
Following the clues to find the culprit.
Yeah, and sometimes the culprit isn't what you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
It might not be that people aren't interested in your platform. It might just be that the onboarding process is clunky.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that brings us to takeaway number 2.
Okay, number 2.
Compliance and user experience.
Yes.
Do not have to be enemies.
You can have both.
You can have both.
It's about finding that sweet spot.
Exactly.
Where security and usability can coexist.
It's like designing a car.
Okay.
It can be safe, but it can also look good.
Right. You don't have to sacrifice one for the other.
Exactly. And then takeaway number 3 is measure what matters.
Yes.
So we talked about tracking all these different metrics, churn rate, how long it takes to fill out forms, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's like having a dashboard for the user's journey.
Exactly. You can see, what's working, what's not.
Okay.
You can make changes as you go.
So with all of that in mind, I think it's time to move on to our final thoughts.
Yes.
And a thought-provoking question for our listeners to ponder.
Stay tuned.
All right. So we've spent this whole deep dive uncovering the mystery behind these high churn rates in B2B payment platforms, right?
Yes.
We use those 5 whys.
Yeah.
We really pinpointed that a lot of times. It's this clunky onboarding experience that's really the culprit.
It's the culprit, yeah.
And then we talked about how phased onboarding could be a really great solution.
It could really turn things around.
But it's crazy how often we kind of overlook that human element, you know?
It really is.
When we're so focused on security and efficiency and...
Yeah, and like we said, it's not easy to find that balance between a smooth user experience and, you know, all those regulations.
But it's so important.
But it is essential.
You know, it makes me wonder about those businesses that finally have that aha moment where they realize, like, oh, wow, we've been neglecting our users' experience this whole time.
Like a light bulb goes off.
Exactly. It's like, wait a minute.
Right.
We've been so focused on protecting our business that we forgot about the people who are actually using it.
The people that make it work.
Exactly. And I think it's those moments of realization that lead to the biggest innovations and the biggest improvements.
When you finally see it.
Yeah. And when it comes to these B2B payment platforms, I mean, prioritizing that user experience, it can have such a ripple effect. You know, it affects your churn rate, your brand reputation, customer loyalty.
Absolutely.
The bottom line.
The whole thing.
It's like investing in a relationship, you know?
Well, that's a good way to put it.
If you make someone feel valued and respected from the very beginning, they're way more likely to stick around.
Of course.
But if you make it confusing or difficult,
you make it a hassle.
They're going to walk away.
They're gone.
They are never coming back.
And that brings us to our final thought.
Oh, yes.
And a thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Okay, what is it?
So think about your own experiences with online platforms.
Okay.
You know, whether it's your banking app or a website you like to shop on, or even a B2B service you use.
Okay.
Where have you had a really seamless, enjoyable onboarding experience?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah. And what made it stand out for you?
For me, I think it's those platforms that can find that balance between security and convenience. They ask for just enough to get you started.
Right.
And then as you go, they kind of gather more information, but it never feels like you're jumping through hoops.
Yeah, no hoops.
It just feels natural.
It's all about building that trust gradually.
Exactly.
Rather than demanding everything up front.
And I think it comes down to those little details.
Oh, yeah.
For clear instructions. Intuitive navigation.
Yep.
Helpful prompts.
Sometimes even a little bit of humor can go a long way.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's funny you mention humor.
Yeah.
I was using a platform recently, and their onboarding had all these, like, playful illustrations and witty copy.
I love that.
It just made the whole thing feel so much less intimidating.
Right, like you're having a conversation.
Yeah. And I think that's something we often forget in the B2B world, where everything is so serious.
So formal.
Yeah. But as we've learned today, even in a complex industry like this, there's room for creativity.
There's room for fun.
Yeah. And a little bit of humanity can make all the difference.
You can really turn a boring task into a positive experience.
And that's what we want.
Yeah, you want people to feel good about using your platform.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope you walk away with a fresh perspective on how important user experience is.
Even in those really complex industries.
Absolutely. So remember, it's not just about compliance.
Nope.
It's about creating a journey that feels smooth and intuitive.
And, dare I say, enjoyable.
Enjoyable for your users.
Because at the end of the day,
happy
users equals happy business.
That's it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.
We hope you found it insightful. And maybe even a little inspiring.
We'll see you soon.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning.
Keep asking why.
And we'll see you on the next deep dive.